the power and attraction of Maya is so strong. Yoganandaji said it takes 5 to 8 million lifetimes for a soul to reach liberation. And it maybe would take a little less time if it were a little more obvious the way to go. There's the legend that you probably know of God creating the universe. And he thought, well, now if everyone knew the goal of life was self-realization, well, they would just meditate and merge back into me, and that would be the end of creation. But I want this Leela to continue for a long time. So let me hide the truth so that man would take a long time to find it. And he thought, where can I hide it? Maybe in the depths of the sea, in the deepest part of the ocean. But then he said, no, man is very clever. Sooner or later, he'll invent submarines and sonar. He'd find it there. Maybe in deep space beyond the farthest stars. No, sooner or later, he'd find it there. Where is the place? Where is the last place that people would look for the truth? Within their own hearts, inside their own beings. And this describes rather the spiritual path, that in those 5 to 8 million lifetimes we've been seeking happiness outside of ourselves. Our job, our family, this, that. And we've looked in the depths of the ocean and in deep space. But only finally do we start to look within. As the Gita says, I, the unmanifested, pervade the entire universe. Behold my divine mystery. All beings seem not to exist in me, nor do I seem to exist in them. Yet I am their sole creator and preserver. Think of it this way. As the air moves through space, but it's not space, so do all creatures have their being in me, but they are not me. The Bible says something very similar. It says, the wind blows where it wills. You hear the sound of the wind, but you don't know where it comes from or where it's going. And so it is with everyone born of spirit. So it is with God's presence. And Sankhya philosophy says it very frankly, God is not provable. It's a divine mystery. We can't see the air, we can't see the wind, but we feel them. We know that they're there. We sense that the air within us is the same as the air all around us. As Yoganandaji said, the sea can exist without the waves, but the waves breathe not without the sea. We are just a tiny part of that vast sea of God's infinite spirit. But instead of the truth being hidden, as Master said at the beginning, how can we see those spiritual temple doors opening to us everywhere? And many times I recall that some door opening of divine presence, either through communing in nature or through meditation. I've felt that. And once when I was 21 years old, I decided to take a seclusion and introspect. And I went hiking alone on an isolated area of the west coast of Canada. And I found this one small beach. And the only way you could reach the beach was once a day at low tide. So of course there was nobody there. It was completely isolated. And I stayed there for 4 days, meditating, staring at the ocean, at the waves. And in that time, concluded within myself, I sort of gained the courage and clarity, the clarity that my lifetime path was the spiritual path, and the courage to leave Canada, go to California, and find an ashram where I could live with other people who had that same goal. And years before this, Swami Kriyananda sat for hours on a beach with the same thoughts in his head, and he was at the opposite corner of North America having those thoughts. And he concluded that God must be an intelligent consciousness, and that we can commune with that consciousness, and that the goal of life is self-realization. And he dedicated himself to that as his lifetime goal in life. Swami Kriyananda was asked, what's the purpose of pilgrimage? How to get the most out of pilgrimage? And he said, the best way is with your eyes closed. Don't just go looking here and there, looking for a new experience, enjoying the scenery. Close your eyes and meditate. Attune deep within. When you find a deep vibration behind that experience, then you'll reach the source of inspiration. And you'll know how to get to that source whenever you want. That is the essence of the spiritual path. And these are the doors that can open to us if we look for them. I met a young American man who came here to India, and he came because his uncle was coming on a pilgrimage to Babaji's cave. And this young man, his name was Marlon, and he described himself as sort of a rigid and dogmatic Christian. And he had no interest in coming to India. He had no interest in Babaji's cave. But here was a free invitation from his uncle, and so he came along. And they were with several friends of his uncle. And when they arrived, Swami Kriyananda was here. And Swamiji said to Marlon, he said, you're about to have some incredible adventures. But then Swamiji touched him on the forehead, and he said, but keep your mind open. And he rapped him on the chest, and he said, you must, above all, keep your heart open. And this group of friends went to Babaji's cave during monsoon, which is not a good idea. And sure enough, as they were walking down the steep hill, there was a tremendous rainfall and mist. And the path got very slippery and dangerous. And somehow Marlon got stranded from the other people. And he was alone, he slipped, he fell, he started falling down this steep hill. And then he said, this boy appeared. And this boy grabbed him by the arm and started pulling him up. And this was a small boy. And later I met Marlon, and I think Marlon might be the tallest person I've ever met. But he said the boy grabbed him with only one hand. And he pulled him up, and then he continued to guide him. The boy held his hand as they went along the path. And he said, I noticed that the boy's clothes were dry, even though it continued to rain, and that the rain wasn't falling on me anymore either. And the boy brought him down to the road, and Marlon was reaching in his pocket to give the boy some money, and the boy wasn't there anymore. He had disappeared, and he said there was no way the boy could have run that fast. And after that whole experience, Marlon became a devotee, and when we met him, he was living at Ananda village. And this is just one example of these doors that open for us. Recently there was a friend who came here on Sunday, and he said, during the satsang, I closed my eyes for a moment, and I just felt this divine joy. And then he said, I was surprised because later, during the prasad, I closed my eyes for a moment, and I felt that same joy. And here we were just chatting and eating, and it's that joy of spiritual people coming together for the same purpose. And these are spiritual people, but you might just experiment and see, when there's a happy gathering, maybe it's a family celebration, to close your eyes for the moment and see if you can feel the happiness behind all happiness. And try to tune in to that. The source of that happiness is that same divine joy. Try to tune into that. And it's that divine joy that we can always carry around with us and draw on that door that opens for us. If we're blind, we see nothing. But if we're willing, we see those doors open everywhere to beauty, to inspiration. And behind everything, we see that divine hand. As Yogananda ji said, in the forest, thou art green. To the serviceful, thou art service. To the lover, thou art love. And to the yogi, thou art bliss. Thank you.
You may have heard us speak about George Washington Carver before. He was a great inventor, an American black man, soon after slavery was abolished in the U.S. And the South was having a very difficult time economically because cotton crops had just been grown again and again, and the soil was destroyed, and suddenly all these slaves were free, and they needed to find some way to survive and make a living, and yet the soil was all completely destroyed through non-crop rotation. And this man was a very, very spiritual man, and he said, the Lord always provided me with life-changing ideas. Not that I'm that special. The Lord provides everyone with life-changing ideas. These ideas are quite literally a treasure from the Almighty. It's up to each one of us, however, to choose and dig for the treasure. So he said that every morning he woke up at 4 a.m. to go talk to God and into the woods. And he said that's where he reveals his secrets to me. When everyone else is asleep, I hear God best and learn my plan. So then at one point, he was wondering what he could do with peanuts in the South and how he could grow them and help them rise economically. He knew that peanuts were the solution for soil health, but he needed to know why it was valuable so that he could convince others of this idea of crop rotation. So God told me, separate the peanut into water, fats, oils, resins, starches, then combine these. Then the Lord said, then you will know why I made the peanut. And within 10 days, George Washington Carver had discovered more than 300 uses for the peanut. And it very much helped the American South come up economically after the Civil War and after the abolition. So this is one way that we can all dive deep, go be quiet with God early in the morning when it's all quiet, and ask Him for inspiration, ask Him for the solution. The truth is written within your heart. And there's a very, probably the most great ancient mathematician, Archimedes, from like 200 or 300 BC, and he discovered buoyancy, and he very much worked on the symbol of pi. And anyway, I actually don't know about it, but I know that he was very great, and he's one of the, his mathematical solutions are still being used to this day. Well, in the 10th century, these theorems that he wrote were transcribed into original Greek onto a parchment paper. And 3 centuries later, a monk came along and used the parchment and scrubbed off the theories and wrote a prayer on them. And a century after that, somebody else came along and just painted over the monk's prayer. But once modern technology came, then they were able to do x-rays through the parchment and find the truths that Archimedes had discovered, that somebody had written in the 10th century. All this to say that God writes these amazing things on our hearts and in our consciousness, and we also cover that up. God's truth about who we are and why we're here and what is the purpose of our lives. And we cover it up with things that we're distracted by, things that our little self is yearning for, things that we think are going to give us security and happiness that we long for. And yet it's on our hearts all along. We need to use that X-ray vision, that introspection, that inner awareness and sight, and help us to understand. Yogananda said that self-realization is that knowing of body, mind, and soul, that we are already in the kingdom of heaven. We are already with God. All we need to do is improve our knowing. So we need to go beneath the surface. Yogananda tells a story about a disciple who was looking to get married, and he saw this beautiful, beautiful woman and said, this is the woman I'm going to marry. I'm going to pursue her. And Yogananda said, actually, she's not the right one for you. And he pursued her anyway and got very hurt. And later on, he was telling our Guru Yogananda, you know, there's this other woman. She's quite fat and actually not very pretty, but we've developed a friendship. So, and Yogananda said, actually, she's the one for you. And he said, no. And then later on, he became more and more deeper friends with her, and they got married, and they had a very, very loving friendship. And Yogananda would say that you can't have a truly successful, fulfilling marriage unless you are first spiritually compatible. And he said, every human experience is only a stepping stone to our true goal, which is fulfillment in God. And that we need to take every experience and try to develop the attitudes and the qualities like selflessness and kindness and loyalty. The same qualities that help us in all our relationship are the same qualities that help us to become a true devotee of God. And so it's these things that we need to look for in every human experience. It's so easy for us to look outside ourselves for blame or for happiness, but we need to look inside and know that what's coming to us, we have drawn. Yogananda said, you know, what's ours will come to us, and we can't keep it from coming to us. And so for those inner lessons, we always have to look and say, am I going to learn from this, or am I going to just say this is a random event and it has nothing to do with me? There's nothing outside of God's direction in our life, of the Guru's guidance in the lessons that we are meant to be learning. I've been reading a book lately. It's called Factfulness, and it's by Hans Rosling. And he talks about how with the media these days, it's so easy to be depressed and sort of a little bit anxious and anxiety-filled, that everything is going wrong in the world. And we already know that media gets paid by bringing up dramatic, bad news, because that's what sells. Bad news is what sells. And that, he had basically gone even to Davos, to the world's most affluent and intelligent and leaders of the free world. And he gave this presentation and saying, how many think that, world hunger is worse than it ever was, or that poverty is worse, or that, and everybody thought the world was just going downhill, even these very, very intelligent men. And it turns out that so many things in the world are not as bad as we all think, and so many things are better than we all think. And so he said, people call me an optimist or say that I'm a Pollyannian, but he said, it's better to know the facts. Yes, I mean, things like, infant mortality and girls' education and, deaths from wars, all of these things have gone down, and things that have increased are like nature protection, water source protection, also girls in school have gone up. And he said there's so many things to be positive about. And yes, that's not to make us lazy and not continue to fix the things that need to be done. But, the world has improved, and there's still a lot of bad things that need to be improved. But let's look at it in perspective, and what is wrong, let's work on, but let's not be panicked or helpless about things that have already improved. So I was thinking about that in our spiritual lives, when we lose our temper or when we fall short of what we want to be spiritually, we tend to just hit ourselves on the head again and again, saying, I thought by now I will have conquered my anger. I thought by now I will have conquered my impatience. And then think, what's the use? I've tried all these years and I'm still not where I want to be. But the idea is, let's learn where we need to work. Look at where we have improved. My relationships have improved. My meditation time has gotten longer. My concentration has increased. I do feel the stillness and presence of God sometimes in my meditation. These are all wonderful things. And now let me work on the things I still need to work on, because we're no longer fully in ego consciousness, and yet maybe we are not yet saints, but we are on the way, and we should be encouraged that walking a serious spiritual path is, actually, it's the only thing we can do in our lives. What's our other choice? Pretending that we don't know God exists, or saying there's no use, no purpose of our lives. So we think of the example of Swami Kriyananda. He read the Autobiography of a Yogi and crossed the country in 4 days and became a disciple of Yogananda. He modeled his life on the principles of self-realization, of becoming a good disciple, of learning the teachings, of meditating, and then changing himself, living at his center, and then going out and being an example for others and teaching other people to live at their center. And those truths we can all live, and we can all help those of us, those people around us that are still struggling with ways that we used to struggle. Maybe some of those areas we have conquered. And I'll just conclude with this story. The sage of Satori, he was a guru, and one time his devotees came to him and he was just throwing rocks at them in anger. And most of the devotees just went away and said, this guy's crazy, I'm leaving. And one disciple picked up the rock and was grateful for the rock, and went back to and put it on his altar and prayed at his altar. And the next morning he found that the rock had turned to gold. So many of us have been given such great teaching, such great guidance, and we don't want to be the disciples that just ignore that guidance or half-heartedly follow it. We want to be those that that are grateful for it and practice with it and tune in through chanting, through meditation, through readings, through recordings, through satsang, through seva, through everything, all the opportunities that we have, and allow ourselves to dive deeper with that X-ray vision into our heart and our minds, and just that doorway to self-realization will open for us if we are sincere in our seeking. God bless you.